The robust process is from Chapter 6 of the book Roadmaps to World Class. My name is Dr. Stephen Starling, and I am presenting this particular presentation for you. The robust process consists of 6 different phases, the first of which is review, then opportunity, broker, unite, stabilize, and track. The goal of most organizations engaging in the roadmap process is to extend their organization's current efficient frontier to the robust frontier. Now, in doing this, we will have extended our frontiers from the organizational world-class frontier through the enterprise frontier and then to the robust frontier. The reason for this sequencing is because of the fact that in general in organizations they prefer to get their own house in order somewhat before they start to engage with outside external entities, which is what we advocate in developing alliance roadmaps within this particular presentation. Now, this example you see on the right is one that we've carried through for all of the chapters in terms of showing a budgeted hours of 20,000 hours for a given enterprise or company or organization. And then as every time that the efficient frontier is increased, the expected return from the projects of the portfolio given by the red dot goes up. So the idea here is that you can maintain your existing management hours and have higher yields depending upon what you want to measure on that y-axis. Now, we could also be putting other types of measures on the x-axis too. We could have total cost budgeted for projects, for example. Well, ultimately where we're headed, at least in terms of developing our alliance roadmaps, is the integration of the organizational maps with the enterprise maps with the alliance maps. Together, these three make for what we call robust roadmaps. For an organization to create robust roadmaps, the roadmaps must have collaborative projects with alliances. That's a given criteria in our definition of robust roadmaps. In fact, that is provided in the very first chapter of this book. Collaborative projects with alliance members and enterprise members are treated in the same way for both the roadmap and robust process. What you'll notice in this presentation, and certainly in the chapter itself, is that there is very little difference in the approach or the methodology associated with roadmap and robust. Therefore, the term Collaborative Project Opportunity, or CPO, is used in the robust process in the same way as it was in the roadmap process. And in fact, a non-collaborative project in CP is also the acronym, the counter to a collaborative project opportunity, and it's used also within the robust process. So let's take a look at this from the context of alliance roadmaps. Suppose we have 5 organizations that develop an alliance roadmap together. We have CPOs, which are collaborative project opportunities, and we have NCPs, which are not collaborative projects. So let's look at this from the viewpoint of an organization. In this case, let's call it Organization 1, and this will be our organization for the next couple of examples. Suppose that we have 150 not collaborative projects within our organization at this time. Out of this, through the efforts of the collaborations within the alliance, we come up with essentially 25 CPO projects, collaborative project opportunities. Similarly, Organization 2 is going through the same type of effort, Organization 3, 4, and 5. So in this case, we have 5 different alliance members in this particular alliance, and we can see here that our alliance roadmap is the combination of all these CPO projects that each organization is working on. Now, with respect to this, by the way, when I say like 25 CPO projects for Organization 1, we're assuming that Organization 1 is the lead on that particular project, and that's why it's listed with their organization. Other organizations might be working with them, but every project needs to have one manager essentially that is the lead manager for a given project. So the very first phase in the robust process is the review phase, and this is relatively identical to the first phase of the roadmap process, which is also review. In fact, review and opportunity are even titled the same for both of these processes, robust and roadmap. In the review phase, opportunities are generated by comparing capabilities and project priorities for the attributes. And the comparisons are ranked by the opportunity index. In fact, we can see the opportunity index as the OI in the third column. The higher the value of the opportunity index, then essentially the higher rank it will receive. We can also see that the CPO boxes have been, some of the CPO squares, I guess is the way you could phrase it, or boxes have been X'd, which means that they have been selected by this organization who has this particular view to move those attributes into discussion to turn them into projects. Now, by looking at this particular figure, we can figure out very quickly which organization's view this is. This is organization 1's, because the other organizations would not be able to see the actual scores on the different attributes. We can see the scores. Attribute A has a 5 red, which means it's a burning platform project, the highest priority that they want to try to start that particular projects, at least that relate to that attribute in the next 2 years to achieve the attribute's capability. So let's continue with that example. So putting an X mark in the CPO, or collaborative project opportunity column, or box in this case, means that you would like to collaborate. In addition, your score, once you click that, is going to be viewable by other organizations. It hasn't been viewable up to this point, so that's one way that we can protect the information of organizations, to share the minimum amount of information with the other organizations. However, in this case, looking at row 1, we can see that organization 1 does indeed want to collaborate with other organizations. And the reason for that is because of the fact that they have this burning platform need. They want to start projects related to attribute A within the next 2 years. So in this first row, we can see that organization 1 wishes to collaborate, and organizations 2 and 4 have probably responded after organization 1 clicked on the CPO box. So they've signaled that they are willing to assist organization 1 with their capabilities, which we know they have capability on this particular attribute because they have the green circles in 2 columns, column for organization 2 and the column for organization 4 in row 1. So after the review phase is what we call the opportunity phase. And if you recall, within the roadmap process, this phase took the greatest amount of time, because this is where actually the rubber meets the road, and the people from the different organizations have decided we're going to look at the idea of collaboration between our organizations. And the attributes that we selected by checking the CPO boxes have essentially moved into the opportunity phase to become discussions. Now, these discussions could be done in an online format and take the form of forums with discussion threads. This is probably the best way to achieve this, and this is the capability that we have developed within the Roadmaps Institute to facilitate this also. Now the opportunities can be re-ranked by a new index called the Collaborative Opportunity Index. The Collaborative Opportunity Index is simply a summation of the opportunity indices of the various organizations which have agreed to investigate the opportunity for collaboration. So the COI index is just simply a summary of the opportunity indices of the individual organizations. Here's a view of an opportunity discussion in terms of a snapshot. We showed this in the roadmap process also presentation. The Collaborative Opportunity Index is 733. In this case, we can see that up next to the row for supplier scorecards. It's not a negative value. That actually, the negative in front of the 733 is not a negative. It actually shows that the discussion thread is open and such that the person can see everything below it. The discussion is broken down into the set topics. They're the same as in the roadmap process. These are predefined topics that provide structure and information needed to develop project charters for the broker phase. So in these opportunity discussions, I won't go into detail with these because we did this in the roadmap process. Essentially, this is where we start to identify all the different elements of information that we need to know to be able to develop our project proposals and ultimately our project charters between the organizations that then should be signed by the champions and the actual project leads of those particular projects. So with respect to this, we have discovery, breakdown, leadership. We need to calculate the value, which is where we get into the financial analysis, perhaps the stickiest part of the whole discussion that might occur. What are the management hours that we expect? What are the dependencies between this project and other projects? Are we going to need placeholders to protect the proprietary information of the organizations that might be involved? And then who is it that actually is going to agree on this, and when are we going to agree on this? Well, that should be occurring in the broker phase. Below, by the way, this figure, you can see a snapshot of a synchronous discussion. The previous discussion that I showed you on the previous slide was a asynchronous discussion, which is used text only and can be done whenever a participant wants to engage into that particular process. A synchronous negotiation or a synchronous discussion can occur online using a approach such as Macromedia's Breeze, as you see below. Microsoft also has a product called Live Meeting, and certainly you could even use the most inexpensive approach would be using Skype, where Skype is a free product from Skype.com. So one of the things we do want to try to achieve out of this discussion is development of project proposals. Now, for each discussion, we could have multiple project proposals, and a project proposal can be set up at any time during a discussion. By default, we have it set up, whoever it is that the project proposal is developed by becomes the project lead manager until leadership is discussed, and a new manager or the same person would be essentially by consensus discussion become the de facto leader. So essentially the project proposal is a charter that contains summaries of the information provided in the 8-point list in the discussion. Now, a charter actually has a little more structure to it than, say, a discussion. So the nice thing about these discussions, particularly if you did an asynchronous one, you end up with all the text that you pretty much would need to be able to go in and edit and carve out a charter, which generally a charter is limited to about 2 pages. You want to keep it very sweet and simple. Setup of a project proposal does not mean the project has necessarily been accepted or authorized, and certainly setup of a charter at this point, if you take it to that point, is not authorized either. We've got to go into the broker phase and really discuss the charters and proposals. So now we're in the broker phase. Brokering an agreement in the broker phase is the most challenging aspect of developing an alliance roadmap. Essentially, what each organization undergoes in the broker phase is a negotiation. Webster's dictionary defines negotiation broadly as conferring, discussing, or bargaining to reach agreement in business transactions. So in the broker phase, we're still going to continue with our discussions we had in the previous phase, opportunity. So we might leverage, for example, Adobe Breeze or Live Meeting if we want synchronous discussions, or we would be utilizing our asynchronous discussion board if we're doing this online. Now, of course, I keep bringing up online. Certainly, everything we're talking about here can be done in traditional face-to-face physical meeting rooms. One of the things you may want to consider, particularly if we're looking at many projects that are coming out of the opportunity phase for the robust process, is having a third-party mediator. A mediator may be used to help in the broker phase, and a mediator may be useful, and this is particularly important, to speed the broker phase so management time is minimized. So A Roadmaps Institute certified master can serve as a mediator and as a guide throughout the robust process. Also, a Roadmaps Institute certified partner can serve in this capacity too. In any case, we recommend the use of a third-party person to be able to come into different discussions and help to reach resolution as a unbiased outside third-party person. Let's talk a little bit about the idea of the collaborative focus in the broker phase. Negotiations in the robust process should not result in a single winner or loser. Successful robust process negotiations result in win-win negotiations. And these winnings are seldom equally divided, so don't get hung up on this idea of 50-50, even though this is the way that we would like to have the result in the negotiations happen in the long run between the same principals. In other words, over, say, 10 projects, we would prefer that the winnings balance out. And we believe that is indeed possible if you negotiate in relative good faith. But on a project-by-project basis, the winnings are seldomly equally divided. So let's talk a little bit about negotiation itself. In particular, let's start with negotiation stages. And the reason why we need to discuss negotiation at this point is because within the robust process, unlike the roadmap process, we are dealing with external entities, and companies themselves or organizations, when they're dealing with other organizations, tend to take positions and will have a very difficult time in many situations compromising to the point where both parties feel like that there's reasonable good faith and rewards from the project to move forward. And we want that to happen. We want these projects to be able to move forward. So a basic understanding of negotiation is important for anybody who's going to be engaged in the robust process, particularly in the broker phase. So in general, the first stage of negotiations is fact-finding, and this is the point where any inconsistencies in the project proposal that relate to the other organizations are to be investigated. In other words, if you believe that the cost estimations and time estimations, for example, from one organization are excessive, such that you're trying to, or they are trying to essentially get more of the return from the project based upon that investment, then you probably want to ask for some facts behind their calculations. This goes for all sorts of questions you could be asking of how, what, when, who, and why, essentially, associated with the different aspects of the projects themselves. The next stage after fact-finding, because fact-finding usually requires an adjournment and then coming back together, you will have a recess that will occur at different points. Now, you're not going to call it a recess. You're just going to say, okay, well, let's get back into our discussion next week or 2 or 3 days later after I get the information. But anyway, it's during the recess where where the negotiating team should reassess what it is that it wants to achieve from this particular project and whether or not it wants to review and refine essentially its project value estimate and any other estimates or assumptions. So the fact-finding and recess could actually be iterative, especially for projects which have very high returns and high costs. You might have fact-finding, then recess, then fact-finding again, and then recess, and it might be an iterative process until you get to the point of narrowing the differences. And this could be the end of the negotiation in terms of the fact that you could come to an agreement very quickly here. When active negotiations essentially reconvene, the negotiator defines each issue, states the facts and any underlying assumptions, and then attempts to convince the other organization's representatives that their position is reasonable. Now, both parties are going to be trying to achieve this simultaneously. And then hopefully at this point, agreement can indeed be reached and the project proposal or charter can move forward. If agreement cannot be reached, though, on an issue, the negotiator moves on to the next issue. Usually you want to try to ask about issues or try to get agreement on things that you're going to get yeses out of, and then leave the hardest negotiations to the very end. But suppose that essentially we don't actually achieve agreement in narrowing of the differences for all the different aspects of the particular project. Well, maybe you can modify that particular project and reduce its scope such that everybody will be happy. What I encourage organizations to not do is move to hard bargaining. And I really do not believe that hard bargaining should be used in settling on a collaborative project charter. The reason for this is it sets precedents for the future of the negotiations for other projects. And hard bargaining itself involves the use of take it or leave it tactics. And its generally use is limited to one-time or adversarial situations where long-term collaborative relationships are not an objective. Long-term relationships are an objective if you have indeed included that particular alliance member in the alliance itself. That decision should have been made long before in the design process in terms of adding that alliance member to your alliance or not. Let's discuss some negotiation techniques. The first is getting to know you. Human beings are the ones that conduct negotiations, not abstract representatives without any individuality. If possible, you should get to know the individuals representing the other party before the negotiation begins. And this is particularly true of negotiation abroad, say in Asia. Utilize questions effectively. I think this is one of my favorites. I like to ask questions to actually bring the other party over to my way of thinking, I guess you could say, but also to explore what they're thinking, and it might actually convince me to change my position. Certainly a perceptive question can tactfully adjust the other organization's position. Utilize positive statements. There's just no reason to utilize negative ones. Sophisticated questions perceptively used with positive statements can certainly favorably influence the course of the negotiations. Be a good listener. And I know these different techniques appear to be relatively obvious, but certainly being a good listener is helpful. In particular, you will often discover that the other party might give away information that just by listening to them and not even asking questions, letting them ramble on about what they want, will give you some negotiation advantages. Certainly be considerate. A small number of negotiation experts contend that negotiators who are as brutal and arbitrary as possible are the ones that win negotiations. We've seen this, for example, if you take a flight on Southwest Airlines or some other airline, you'll often see Charles Curras School of Negotiation advertised to be able to take courses on essentially this idea. One of the things they stress, at least within that particular school, is this idea of hard bargaining. So certainly there is a school of thought of this, and hard bargaining does indeed make sense when you're talking about commodity products and transactional relationships, but it does not in the types of negotiations needed for the robust process. So if you are indeed considerate, certainly professionals that are considerate to the other parties lose no negotiation advantage whatsoever by being so. My favorite book, and I think the favorite of many people is on negotiation, is the book Getting to Yes. An irony with Getting to Yes is that Fisher and Urey, the actual writers of it, could not negotiate out of their own disagreements between each other, and they ended up in a lawsuit in Boston. That's just a little piece of trivia, but it doesn't change the fact that their message is crystal clear and has been utilized successfully by companies all over the world. The first is to separate the people from the problem. And successful negotiators tend to divide the negotiation into two components, the people issue and the technical issues. Now, when we're talking about technical issues, we're talking about issues such as quality, time, price, deliverables, duration of the project, and such. People issues require negotiators to understand where the other party is coming from. And in effect, the negotiators must walk in the shoes of the organization's representatives to be able to identify the people problems and then separate them out from essentially the technical issues. Focus on the interests. During the fact-finding stage of the brokered or negotiated agreements, the professional negotiator learns the other party's interests while disclosing his or her own interests, but not necessarily their objectives. So you need to focus in on what it is that they are interested in, because once you identify what it is the other parties are interested in, then you can try to meet their needs through creativity, for example, and then you can actually work to try to fulfill what they would like to have while still simultaneously fulfilling what it is that your interests are. And perhaps the very most important point of Fisher and Urey's in the book Getting to Yes is this idea of inventing options for mutual gain. Now, this is a point that is very valid for the robust process, because what we've been trying to do is identify opportunities between the organizations. And certainly these opportunities are all about options for mutual gain. In looking at the options for mutual gain, try to shift the discussions with respect to the project proposals and charts over to looking for ways that you can satisfy. For example, if somebody has a limited budget on a given project, well, maybe what you do is resource sharing instead of perhaps a price reduction or some sort of return on the investment coming back to you for that particular project. Use objective criteria, and this is certainly true if you want to develop long-term relationships. So if a long-term relationship is an objective of both parties, the use of objective criteria is certainly going to avoid much what we call positional negotiation and the possibility of disrupting or destroying that particular relationship. Recognize that the benefits are not divided equally. And I've already mentioned this before, but Fisher and Urey call this a common misunderstanding. And this common misunderstanding exists that successful negotiation means an equal distribution of the benefits. And they state essentially that while both organizations should benefit from a well-negotiated, in this case for us, a project charter, the benefits are seldomly divided 50-50. In continuing with the broker phase, an agreement report is generated which lists the projects by their project value index rank. The PVI rank essentially was set up in the opportunity phase. And if you take a look at the figure below, you can see that essentially the projects in the agreement report are either accepted or rejected by representatives of the various organizations involved in the robust process. Looking at, for example, the highest ranked project, Project 1, has a PVI of 99%. So the PVI ranges from 0 to essentially 100%. 99% would be a very highly rated project. And in this case, the first organization, or the organization which is actually viewing the agreement report at this time, is Organization 1. And they have approved essentially every project at least listed on this particular slide. You can see that by the column of green circles underneath the 1 under approval status. Looking at that first project, in fact, Project 1, we can see that Organization 2 has not given any kind of statement as to whether they want to be involved or not. Perhaps they were never asked to begin with also. Organization 3, though, has given it a red light, meaning essentially that it will not participate with in Project 1, at least with Organization 1. 4 and 5 also have not put in any information to indicate whether they might work on this particular project. However, in any case, the point is by the end of the day, after all the organizations have gone through their approvals, then the different organizations will understand which projects have collaboration opportunities, and they will work together to make the project become a reality and go into the robust roadmap. The third to last phase is the unite phase, and the bulk of the work within the robust process has already occurred at this point. Essentially, what we're doing in the unite phase is we're taking the project proposals that have been agreed upon in the broker phase, and we're setting them up in charters. And now they're loaded into two different locations. The first is in each of the organization's project portfolio management system, or PPM system. This is the projects are loaded along with each organization's not collaborative projects. In other words, the projects which are not going to be collaborated on, and in fact will be hidden from the other organizations in the robust process. The second location is a neutral location to house the Alliance roadmap. In other words, each organization that's working on a project with another outside external organization needs to have the information of that project in their own project portfolio system. But there also needs to be a location where information, at least the very minimal amount, is put into a neutral location and housed there, so that everybody involved can see whether progress is occurring or not without necessarily going into great detail. Now, you could agree to not use a neutral location and use one of the organizations involved to house the Alliance roadmap. The next step is to link the roadmaps together. Collaborative roadmaps may be electronically linked to projects in the proprietary systems of each organization. In other words, once again, we will have an Alliance roadmap that will be developed that everybody can see, but yet these projects will be linked into projects actually occurring within the organization's own project portfolio management system. So a centralized location is used to temporarily house the projects so that the roadmaps can be jointly developed. These linkages then to the project portfolio management systems of the participating organizations are modeled, but they are manually managed using placeholder milestones. The placeholder milestone alternative is clean, it's simple, and it protects the proprietary systems and the data. So we can see the placeholder milestone below in the figure as the yellow rectangle, I guess you could call it. And it's a placeholder between a not collaborative project within organization 1 and the collaborative project in the collaborative project space. In other words, the Alliance roadmap space. Here we can see a second placeholder milestone coming from or resulting from the fact that we need to link in the not collaborative projects within organization 2 with collaborative project 2. So we have placeholder milestone 2 essentially embedded between these. And you might have collaborative projects being immediate predecessors to not collaborative projects. In other words, the information going into a proprietary system. However, in this case, you don't need to have some sort of milestone between them because the data and information on the projects coming from the Alliance roadmap is not protected in the same way as proprietary information internally within an organization itself. This brings us to the stabilize phase. Prior to this phase, the stabilize phase, approved projects have been added to the Alliance roadmap. In addition, the organization roadmaps and enterprise roadmaps have been formally linked in with this Alliance roadmap. The composition of all three of these roadmaps forms what we call a robust roadmap. At this point, though, the robust roadmap is unstable due to the complexity of combined resources, the collaborative leadership involved, the merged technologies. That alone by itself would be a huge undertaking in many organizations, especially if they are behind the times on their technologies, and the information system incompatibilities and other types of uncertainties that would come up. There are too many really to even list here, but the major ones are. The management teams then are working on the projects. They have to continue to collaborate to ensure that the robust roadmaps are executed to try to meet the target durations, costs, and goals. Now we move from the stabilize phase to the track phase. Now the stabilize phase will continue throughout the life of the different projects involved, because certainly collaboration is going to take a continuous effort to try to make the project successful. But essentially in the track phase, the roadmaps are placed under the direction of the Roadmaps Council. Now I like to describe the Roadmaps Council as being very similar to a project management office, where the projects within an organization are centralized into one location. Well, in this case, the roadmaps are essentially centralized together with the projects involved within those roadmaps, such that a body of managers representing the various organizations collaborate and work together to try to ensure the success of those projects. So the council is charged with essentially ensuring the projects are tracked to hit the target parameters, such as the deadlines and certainly the budgets. We're going to learn more about Roadmaps Councils later in an additional presentation. So bear with me in terms of understanding this idea of the Roadmaps Council. It is an organizational issue which is a very important one for making alliances successful. Now on to the concluding remarks with respect to the robust process. The goal of organizations engaging in the robust process is, or at least should be, to maximize the organization's robust frontier. This goes for all of the organizations working collaboratively together. So in a way, what we're looking at is really maximizing the frontier of your alliances. Managers must be cautious to not lose sight of the goal by creating alliance-based projects for the sake of creating alliance-based projects. In other words, you don't want to just create projects for the sake of creating these projects. Certainly being altruistic and the kumbaya of like trying to work together is a wonderful, wonderful idea. But at the end of the day, we really have to have our bottom lines show results that justify essentially our investment in this collaboration. And this is relatively easy to do, ironically, because there are so many opportunities between organizations to share information and create synergies that certainly your bottom line will be impacted in a positive manner. Each project proposed within the robust process must be accepted or rejected on its merits in comparison to all projects. And this gets us into the idea, once again, of the robust frontier. We are looking at trying to optimize our investments in our time and energy and money, and certainly in management hours, per example, I've given associated with the frontier. So we want to try to make sure that we don't stick in a bunch of pet projects or projects that simply are lower down in terms of the rankings, in terms of their returns, that will reduce essentially our ability to be able to optimize the robust frontier. Well, that concludes essentially the robust process. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me, Dr. Stephen Starling, at the Roadmaps Institute.